My name is Dolores Williams, 35 years old, and for 12 years I was the accounts payable supervisor at Tech Growth Solutions. I built vendor relationships that kept our entire operation running smoothly until Bradley, our new CFO, decided my systems were outdated. The day he screamed at me to clear my desk, I never imagined how quickly everything would fall apart, or how satisfying it would be when Softcore's CEO joined that emergency board meeting. While I tell you how I went from fired to vindicated, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated at work. Tech Growth Solutions wasn't always the thriving tech company it eventually became. When I first joined as an entry-level accountant, we occupied half a floor in a nondescript office building with barely 50 employees. Our mission was ambitious, though, providing integrated software solutions for mid-sized businesses looking to scale their operations. I was employee number 43, fresh out of college, with an accounting degree, and eager to prove myself in the real world. Those early years were exciting. We were scrappy, resourceful, and everyone wore multiple hats. I started handling basic accounts receivable tasks, but quickly took on additional responsibilities in accounts payable as well. By my third year, I was managing all our vendor relationships and payments. The company was growing rapidly, adding new clients every month, and our vendor network was expanding just as quickly. Thomas Hartman, our original CFO, recognized my talent for organization and eye for detail. He was an older gentleman, probably in his late 50s when I started, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses that perpetually sat on the end of his nose. Thomas had decades of experience in corporate finance and became my mentor. Dolores accounting isn't just about numbers, he told me during one of our weekly meetings. It's about relationships and systems that support those relationships. Anyone can process a payment, but not everyone can build trust with the people who keep our business running. Under his guidance, I developed increasingly sophisticated processes for managing our vendor relationships. As the company grew to over 200 employees, these systems became crucial to our operations. I created detailed documentation for every payment procedure, built relationships with key contacts at each vendor, and established customized payment terms that benefited both sides. Our most important vendor relationship was with Softcore Innovations. They provided the core technology infrastructure that our own software solutions were built upon. Without their reliable service, we literally couldn't deliver our products to clients. Maxwell Richardson, Softcore's CEO, was personally involved in establishing our partnership during the early days. He was a brilliant developer turned business leader who understood both the technical and relationship sides of the business. Over time, I developed a direct line of communication with Maxwell and his finance team. We had quarterly reviews of our account status, and I made sure Softcore was always paid promptly with clear communication. In return, they provided us premium support and favorable terms as we grew. This relationship was worth millions to our company, though I doubt many people realized it at the time. Our CEO, Richard Prescott, was a visionary but not particularly detail-oriented. Tall, charismatic, and always talking about the next big opportunity, Richard trusted his department heads to handle the day-to-day operations. He and Thomas had a strong working relationship based on mutual respect. Richard would dream big and Thomas would figure out how to make the finances work. The system functioned well, and I became Thomas's right hand when it came to managing cash flow and vendor relationships. By my 10th year, I had been promoted to accounts payable supervisor with a team of 4 accountants reporting to me. We had our challenges, especially as the company grew so quickly. Legacy systems sometimes struggled to keep up with our volume, and new software implementations were always stressful, but we made it work. My team knew the importance of maintaining good vendor relationships, even when our internal systems were strained. I created what my team affectionately called the Bible, a comprehensive process document that covered every aspect of our accounts payable procedures. It included standard operations, special protocols for key vendors, troubleshooting guides for common problems, and emergency procedures for system failures. This document was over 100 pages by the time it was finished, representing years of institutional knowledge. The company continued its aggressive growth trajectory, which put additional stress on all our systems. We doubled in size over a 2-year period, and our accounting software was struggling to keep up. Thomas and I had been planning a major system upgrade for months, carefully mapping out how we would transition without disrupting our vendor payments. Then about 18 months ago, Thomas announced his retirement. He was 67 and ready to spend more time with his grandchildren, and finally take his wife on that European river cruise they'd been talking about for years. While I was happy for him, I also felt a sense of loss. He had been my mentor and advocate for over a decade. "Don't worry," Thomas assured me during his last week. "I've made sure Richard understands how valuable you are. Whoever they bring in as the new CFO would be wise to rely heavily on your expertise." I appreciated his confidence, but I also felt apprehensive. Change is always difficult, especially when you've become accustomed to a certain working relationship. Still, I was established in my role, respected by my team and other departments, and confident in my systems and processes. I expected the transition would have its challenges, but I never anticipated just how dramatically things would change. The search for Thomas's replacement took nearly 4 months. During that time, I managed many of the day-to-day CFO responsibilities with support from our controller, Sophia. We kept things running smoothly, which only reinforced my confidence that I understood the company's financial operations inside and out. Perhaps that confidence made me too comfortable, too certain that anyone coming into the CFO role would recognize the value of what we had built. I couldn't have been more wrong. Bradley Holloway's arrival was announced with considerable fanfare. Richard sent a company-wide email highlighting Bradley's MBA from Wharton and his previous experience at a multinational tech corporation. The message emphasized how Bradley would modernize our financial operations and implement best practices from industry leaders. Reading between the lines, I felt a twinge of concern that our existing systems were being preemptively labeled as outdated. Our first meeting did nothing to alleviate those concerns. Bradley was in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in designer suits that made our business casual environment seem suddenly shabby. He had a perpetual expression of mild impatience, as though everyone around him was operating too slowly for his brilliant mind. "So, Dolores," he said, barely glancing up from his laptop as I entered his office. "I've been reviewing our vendor payment systems. They seem archaic." I smiled politely, ready to explain the careful balance we had achieved between our aging software and the personalized processes that kept our vendors happy. "The current system has evolved based on our specific needs and vendor relationships. I'd be happy to walk you through why certain processes work the way they do." Bradley closed his laptop and gave me a patronizing smile. "I appreciate your input, but I've implemented cutting-edge payment systems at companies twice this size. We need to standardize and automate. The personalized approach might have worked when we were smaller, but it's inefficient at our current scale." That first conversation set the tone for our working relationship. Bradley had theories and general knowledge from his previous roles in education, but limited understanding of our specific business context. Yet he was immediately dismissive of systems that had been refined through years of practical experience. In the following weeks, Bradley conducted a whirlwind evaluation of the finance department. He scheduled brief meetings with each team member, asking pointed questions about their processes and efficiency metrics. But these felt less like genuine inquiries and more like efforts to confirm his pre-existing assumptions. Amanda Chen, one of my senior accountants, stopped by my office after her interview. "That was uncomfortable," she said, closing my door. "He kept cutting me off whenever I tried to explain why we handle certain vendors differently. He just wanted to know how many invoices I process per hour compared to industry benchmarks." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth, that raw processing numbers don't capture the relationship management aspect of what we do." He didn't seem impressed. Amanda shook her head. "I don't think he gets what we actually do here." My own follow-up meetings with Bradley were increasingly frustrating. I brought my process documentation to show him the carefully calibrated system we had developed, particularly for strategic vendors like Softcore. "This is your process Bible," Bradley said with a smirk, flipping through the pages. "It's certainly comprehensive. But this is exactly the problem. When processes live in documents rather than systems, they become personality dependent. What if you got hit by a bus tomorrow?" That's exactly why I documented everything I explained, trying to hide my irritation. And my team is cross-trained on all procedures. The documentation ensures consistency regardless of who's handling a particular vendor. Bradley set the binder aside without really examining it. "We need to move to a standardized automated system where any accounting professional could step in and perform these functions without needing a 100-page instruction manual. The tension wasn't limited to our direct interactions. Bradley reorganized the reporting structure, having me report to the newly created position of Director of Financial Operations instead of directly to him. He filled this role with Patricia, an external hire who had worked with him at his previous company. This effectively added a layer between me and the CFO, diluting my influence and access. Next came the external consultants. Bradley brought in a team from Mitchell Business Solutions to evaluate our finance operations. They spent weeks interviewing staff and observing our processes, all while charging exorbitant hourly rates. I tried to be helpful, explaining the nuances of our vendor relationships, particularly with strategic partners like Softcore. Softcore requires specific handling, I told one consultant, Rachel, during an interview session. They're not just another vendor. They're the backbone of our technical infrastructure. Rachel nodded, making notes. And you have a direct relationship with their CEO. Yes, Maxwell and I have quarterly check-ins. It's unusual, but it's been incredibly valuable for both companies. When issues arise, we have established communication channels to resolve them quickly. Later, I learned that my comments about special vendor relationships were characterized as resistance to standardization in the consultant's report. Bradley used this report to justify his planned overhaul, presenting it to Richard and the executive team as evidence that our financial operations were outdated and inefficient. Throughout this period, Bradley's condescending attitude became more pronounced. During department meetings, he would often interrupt me or dismiss my contributions with comments like, "That's an interesting perspective from the old system," or "We need to think more innovatively than that." The most public incident came during a cross-departmental meeting about a month after Bradley joined. We were discussing payment terms for a new major vendor, and I raised concerns about the proposed Net 60 payment terms. Based on our cash flow patterns, Net 60 could create bottlenecks during our seasonal low periods, I explained. We've traditionally negotiated Net 45 with similar vendors, which aligns better with our revenue cycle. Before I could elaborate, Bradley cut in. I think we need to consider more modern approaches to vendor management. Dolores's perspective is rooted in how we've always done things, but best practices in the industry are moving toward extended payment terms to optimize working capital. Several colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was an unnecessary and public undermining of my expertise. After the meeting, our IT director, Jason, stopped me in the hallway. "That was rough," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, your vendor management has always been rock solid. The technical team appreciates how you've maintained the relationship with Softcore. We've never had a service interruption because of payment issues." I appreciated the support, but it was becoming clear that Bradley had already decided my methods were outdated regardless of their effectiveness. I was being systematically marginalized, my expertise dismissed as obsolete rather than valued as institutional knowledge. By the 2-month mark of Bradley's tenure, morale in the accounting department had plummeted. My team members were anxious about the impending changes and frustrated by the consultants constantly looking over their shoulders. I tried to shield them as much as possible while maintaining a professional relationship with Bradley, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The stage was set for the major conflict that would eventually lead to my dismissal. Bradley had made up his mind about our systems, and no amount of evidence or explanation seemed capable of changing it. I was still trying to find a way to work productively with him to help him understand the value of what we had built, but it was becoming increasingly clear that he wasn't interested in learning from the existing team. He had arrived with a mandate to transform, and transform he would, whether it made sense for our specific context or not. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs earlier and perhaps taken a different approach. But at the time, I still believed that the value of our carefully constructed vendor management system would become apparent once Bradley had more time to understand our business. I was wrong about that, and the consequences would soon prove dramatic for everyone involved. The announcement came during an all-hands finance department meeting 3 months after Bradley's arrival. Standing at the front of our largest conference room, he unveiled his vision for the finance department transformation initiative. The centerpiece was a complete overhaul of our payment systems, transitioning from our current software to an enterprise-level solution called Finance Cloud. This represents a paradigm shift in how we manage our vendor relationships, Bradley announced with undisguised pride. Finance Cloud will standardize all payment processes, automate approvals based on predefined rules, and eliminate the inefficient, personalized approaches that have created bottlenecks in our current system. My stomach tightened as I listened. While I recognized that our existing systems needed updating, the approach Bradley was describing would eliminate the nuanced vendor management that had been crucial to our success. Most concerning was his implementation timeline, a complete transition within 60 days. After the meeting, I requested a private conversation with Bradley. In his office, I tried once more to explain the risks of such a rapid wholesale change. "Bradley, I support modernizing our systems, but this timeline is extremely aggressive," I began. "Some of our vendor relationships, particularly strategic ones like Softcore, require careful transition planning. If we disrupt their payment schedule even once, it could damage relationships we've spent years building." He leaned back in his chair, that now familiar look of condescension crossing his face. "Dolores, this is exactly the problem with how things have been run. No vendor relationship should be so fragile that a systematic improvement puts it at risk. If Softcore is a professional organization, they'll understand and adapt to our new, more efficient payment procedures." "It's not about their professionalism," I persisted. "We've negotiated specific terms with them that aren't standard. Their system and ours currently have custom integrations that will need to be rebuilt for Finance Cloud." "The implementation team will handle all technical integrations," Bradley dismissed. "I need you to focus on getting your team ready for the new procedures, rather than finding reasons why change is too difficult." Despite his dismissal, I documented my concerns in a detailed email, outlining specific risks and recommending a phased implementation approach. I copied Patricia Richard and the implementation project manager. I received no response from Bradley or Richard, while Patricia sent a brief note suggesting I maintain a positive attitude toward the transformation. As the implementation proceeded, my warnings began materializing into problems. The Finance Cloud system was sophisticated but rigid. It didn't easily accommodate the various payment terms we had negotiated with different vendors. The implementation team created workarounds, but these were cumbersome and introduced new points of failure. Most critically, the custom payment protocol we had established with Softcore wasn't properly translated to the new system. In our previous process, Softcore invoices received priority routing and verification, ensuring they were always paid within specific timeframes that aligned with their billing cycles. The new system categorized them as a standard Tier 1 vendor, but missed several crucial steps in the verification process. I raised these issues repeatedly during implementation meetings, but my concerns were characterized as resistance to change rather than legitimate technical problems. The implementation consultants, eager to please Bradley, assured him that all vendor requirements were being properly migrated to the new system. My team was struggling to adapt while maintaining our payment obligations. Amanda and I often stayed late creating manual workarounds to ensure critical vendors still got paid correctly. I documented these issues and emailed them to Bradley, Patricia, and the project manager. These emails increasingly went unanswered. The stress was affecting everyone in the department. Rachel, our newest team member, broke down in tears one afternoon when a vendor called angrily about a missed payment. The error had been caused by the new system misclassifying their payment terms, but Rachel felt personally responsible. I went to HR Director Stephanie after that incident, hoping to find an ally who could help address the deteriorating situation. "I understand change is difficult," Stephanie said cautiously after listening to my concerns. "But I also need to balance that against Bradley's mandate to modernize the department." "This isn't about resistance to change," I insisted. "It's about implementing change in a way that doesn't damage our vendor relationships or burn out our staff. The current approach is doing both." Stephanie nodded sympathetically but offered little concrete support. "I'll speak with Bradley about communication and change management best practices. In the meantime, try to document specific issues as objectively as possible." I left her office feeling frustrated but not surprised. Stephanie was relatively new to the company herself and clearly reluctant to challenge a C-suite executive's approach. The situation with Softcore was becoming particularly concerning. Their invoices were now being processed through the standard channels in Finance Cloud, which didn't account for the specific verification steps our previous system had included. I could see an eventual payment failure approaching, like a slow-motion train wreck. Taking initiative, I reached out to my contact in Softcore's accounts receivable department, Jessica, to warn her about the system transition and potential hiccups. We're implementing a new payment system, I explained. There might be some adjustment issues in the coming weeks. If you notice any problems with our payments, please contact me directly before escalating. Jessica appreciated the heads up. Thanks, Dolores. You know how our system gets when payments are off schedule. I'll keep an eye out and let you know if anything seems wrong. Somehow Bradley learned about this conversation. He called me into his office the next day, clearly agitated. I've been informed that you contacted Softcore to tell them our new system might cause payment problems, he said, his voice tight with anger. That is completely inappropriate and undermines confidence in our transformation initiative. I was just being proactive, I defended myself. Managing vendor expectations is part of maintaining good relationships. No, you were projecting your own lack of confidence in the new system, Bradley countered. From now on, all vendor communications about the new payment system need to go through the transformation team. Is that clear? It was a public rebuke and an explicit restriction of my ability to do my job effectively. Word spread quickly through the department, further undermining my position. The following week, we had our first major system test when a batch of vendor payments was processed through Finance Cloud. The results were concerning. Several payments were delayed due to misconfigured approval workflows. 2 vendors received incorrect amounts, and 1 critical payment failed entirely because the new system couldn't accommodate their specific invoice format. My team scrambled to fix these issues manually while I documented each problem and its resolution. I compiled these into a comprehensive report that objectively highlighted the system deficiencies without placing blame. My hope was that Bradley would recognize these as implementation issues that needed addressing before we fully transitioned all vendors. Instead, when I presented the report during our department meeting, Bradley was dismissive. Every system implementation has minor issues, he said. Your team needs to adapt to the new processes rather than expecting the system to accommodate outdated procedures. These aren't minor issues, I pushed back, uncharacteristically confrontational, after weeks of building frustration. These are fundamental gaps in the system's ability to handle our vendor requirements. The room went silent as Bradley and I faced off. His expression hardened. Perhaps the issue isn't with the system, but with your team's willingness to embrace change, he said coldly. I expect everyone to be fully committed to making this transition successful. The meeting ended awkwardly with colleagues avoiding eye contact. Afterward, several team members privately expressed support for my position, but were too intimidated to speak up publicly. That evening, I stayed late again, fixing payment errors and documenting process failures. I found myself in the empty office, surrounded by the wreckage of a system that had worked being replaced by one that didn't. The frustration and sense of professional impotence were overwhelming. Years of carefully built processes and relationships were being dismantled by someone who didn't understand or value them. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. The confrontation that would end my 12-year career at Tech Growth Solutions was just days away. The morning started like many others during that difficult period. I arrived early, hoping to address a payment discrepancy that had emerged the previous evening. One of Softcore's supplementary service invoices had been incorrectly processed, and I wanted to fix it before it caused problems. I was deep in concentration comparing the invoice details with the system entries when Bradley's voice startled me. What are you working on? He asked, standing in my office doorway. There's an issue with a Softcore payment, I explained, trying to keep my tone neutral. The new system categorized their managed security services as a separate vendor instead of part of the master agreement. I'm creating a manual correction. Bradley frowned and walked closer to my desk, looking at my computer screen. You're using the old verification checklist, he observed, pointing to the document I had open. Yes, it helps ensure we're capturing all the required steps, I replied. The new system doesn't have equivalent validation points for Softcore's specific requirements. He picked up the printed copy of my process checklist that was sitting on my desk, flipping through it with visible disapproval. This is exactly what we're trying to move away from. Ad hoc personality-dependent processes that aren't standardized. It's not ad hoc, I defended. It's a documented process that ensures we meet our contractual obligations to a critical vendor. Bradley's face reddened. What happened next played out like a scene from a bad workplace drama, except I was living it. I don't need your process checklist. Clear your desk. He suddenly yelled, his voice echoing down the hallway. This resistance to change ends today. You're either on board with our modernization, or you're not part of the future of this company. The outburst was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. Colleagues in nearby offices fell silent, and I could feel their attention focused on my office. Are you firing me? I finally managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Your position is being eliminated as part of our departmental restructuring, Bradley said, regaining some composure but still visibly angry. Your adherence to outdated processes is holding back our transformation initiative. We need forward-thinking professionals who embrace modern financial practices. The surreal quality of the moment was overwhelming. After 12 years of dedicated service-building systems that kept the company running smoothly through periods of explosive growth, I was being fired for trying to maintain the very vendor relationships that were critical to our success. I'll need you to gather your personal belongings, Bradley continued. Stephanie from HR will meet you here in 15 minutes to discuss transition details and escort you out. He turned and walked away, leaving me sitting there in shock. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see colleagues watching with expressions ranging from surprise to horror. Amanda caught my eye from across the department, her face pale with concern. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur as I tried to process what had just happened. I sat motionless, staring at my computer screen without seeing it, my mind racing through potential responses and consequences. I had a mortgage, car payments, and my mother's assisted living expenses to consider. But beyond the practical concerns, the injustice of it all was staggering. True to Bradley's words, Stephanie arrived 15 minutes later, her professional mask barely concealing her discomfort. Dolores, I'm so sorry about this, she said quietly, closing my office door. This wasn't how we typically handle departmental changes. Is this really happening? I asked, still struggling to accept the reality. 12 years and I'm being fired for trying to make sure our vendors get paid correctly. Stephanie avoided direct eye contact. The official reason is a restructuring of the accounts payable function as part of the finance transformation. Your role is being reconceived as part of the new organizational structure. That's corporate speak for Bradley wants me gone because I'm questioning his approach, I translated. She didn't deny it. I've prepared the standard severance package, she continued. It includes 8 weeks of pay, extended health benefits, and outplacement services. I need you to review and sign these documents. I looked at the folder she placed before me, unable to focus on its contents. Do I need to sign these now? You can take them home to review, Stephanie conceded. But I do need to collect your company laptop badge and other company property before you leave today. The humiliation of being escorted out was perhaps the most difficult part. As I packed my personal items into a box that Stephanie had brought, colleagues watched through the glass walls of my office. Emily, from the adjacent accounting team, discreetly sent me a text message. This is wrong. We're all shocked. Let us know if there's anything we can do. I appreciated the support but couldn't respond. The lump in my throat made it difficult to speak at all, as I packed photos of my family, the plant I had nurtured for 5 years, and the awards I'd received for outstanding service to the company. 12 years of professional life reduced to a small cardboard box. Bradley remained in his office during this process, visible through his glass door but deliberately focused on his computer. I wondered if he felt any remorse or second thoughts. His body language suggested none. With my personal items collected, Stephanie led me through the exit interview process. Her questions about my experience felt hollow given the circumstances, but I maintained my professionalism, answering truthfully, but without the full extent of my anger and disappointment. Is there anything you'd like to share about your concerns before leaving? She asked toward the end of our session. I paused, considering my words carefully. I hope someone continues to monitor the soft-core relationship closely. Their services are critical to our core business functions, and they have specific payment requirements that aren't being properly addressed in the new system. Stephanie nodded, making a note, but I had no confidence my warning would reach anyone who could act on it. Bradley had made it clear that my processes and concerns were considered obsolete. With the exit interview complete, Stephanie walked me through the department one last time to collect my box. Colleagues watched silently, some nodding in solidarity, others averting their eyes, perhaps fearing association with the person who had just been terminated so abruptly. Amanda approached briefly, ostensibly to ask Stephanie a question, but whispered to me, "This is insane. I'll call you later." The walk to the elevator and through the lobby felt endless. I had entered this building nearly every workday for 12 years, often being the first to arrive and the last to leave. Now I was leaving for the last time, carrying a box of mementos, my career at Tech Growth Solutions, ending not with recognition for my contributions, but with an undignified dismissal. In my car in the parking garage, the composure I had maintained finally broke. I sat behind the wheel, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by the injustice and uncertainty. What would I do now? How would I explain this sudden termination to potential employers? Would my professional reputation suffer? The drive home was a blur. I remember stopping at a red light and realizing I had no recollection of the last mile I had driven. My mind was replaying the confrontation with Bradley, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the ways I could have defended myself more effectively. At home, I placed the box of office items on my kitchen table and stared at it. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from concerned colleagues, but I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. The shock was still too fresh, the wound too raw. That weekend was one of the most difficult of my life. I cycled through grief, anger, fear, and occasional moments of odd relief at being freed from the toxic environment that had developed under Bradley's leadership. I started updating my resume, then abandoned it, unable to focus. I researched unemployment benefits, then worried about how a termination might affect my eligibility. Through it all, I wondered what was happening at Tech Growth Solutions without me. Were my warnings about the payment system being heeded? Were vendors like Softcore experiencing disruptions? Part of me hoped things would go smoothly for the sake of my former team members. Another part, the wounded human part, secretly hoped Bradley would face consequences for his short-sighted approach. Little did I know that the consequences were already beginning to unfold, and they would be far more dramatic than even I had anticipated. The first week after my termination passed in a blur of administrative tasks. I filed for unemployment benefits, updated my LinkedIn profile, and began reaching out to my professional network. Several former colleagues sent supportive messages, but most were careful to keep their distance, likely fearing for their own positions. 10 days after my firing, Amanda called. Her voice was hushed, and I could tell she was calling from somewhere private at the office. "Dolores, it's falling apart here," she said without preamble. "The Finance Cloud implementation is a disaster. We missed payments to 6 vendors last week because the approval workflows are broken." "What about Softcore?" I asked, immediately concerned about our most critical vendor relationship. "That's why I'm calling," Amanda replied, her voice tense. "Their monthly infrastructure payment was due yesterday. It didn't go through because the new system flagged it for irregular payment pattern, since it didn't match their standard invoice template. Bradley's team is scrambling to fix it, but no one understands the verification steps that need to happen before Softcore will process a manual payment." I felt a complex mix of emotions, concern for my former team, vindication that my warnings had been justified, and worry about the potential consequences for the company. "The documentation should be in my process binder," I said. "Section 4 covers emergency payment procedures for Softcore." "Bradley had all your process documents put into storage," Amanda said, frustration evident in her voice. "He said they represented outdated methodologies and would confuse people trying to learn the new system." The short-sightedness was staggering. "What's being done to fix it?" "Bradley told the implementation team to expedite a custom workflow for Softcore, but they're saying it will take at least a week. Meanwhile, Softcore's automated system has already flagged our account. We received a warning about service impacts if payment isn't received within 72 hours. Over the next few days, I received regular updates from Amanda and, occasionally, Rachel about the deteriorating situation. The payment to Softcore remained unprocessed as the implementation team struggled to create a solution that would satisfy both Finance Cloud's rigid structure and Softcore's specific requirements. The following Monday, exactly 3 weeks after my termination, the situation escalated dramatically. Amanda called me during her lunch break, her voice shaking slightly. "It happened," she said. "Softcore has implemented service restrictions. Our development environments are still working, but they've reduced our bandwidth allocation for production services by 50%. Clients are reporting slowdowns, and the technical team is in crisis mode. Is Bradley addressing the payment issue? I asked. That's the most frustrating part, Amanda replied. He's blaming the IT department for not properly communicating the technical requirements. And he's blaming our team for not adapting quickly enough to the new system. He's pointing fingers everywhere except at the actual problem, his rushed implementation plan that ignored all your warnings. The situation continued to deteriorate throughout the week. Rachel reported that payment issues had cascaded to other vendors as the finance team diverted resources to fix the softcore problem. Regular payment cycles were disrupted, causing a growing backlog of unpaid invoices. Vendors were calling daily with payment inquiries, and the accounts payable team was overwhelmed. Jason from IT reached out directly, something that surprised me given the risk to his own position. Dolores, this is a complete mess, he said during our call. The development team can't deploy updates because the softcore environments are operating at reduced capacity. Client implementations are being delayed. And now we're hearing that if the payment isn't resolved by Friday, softcore might suspend services entirely. Has anyone reached out to Maxwell at Softcore? I asked, thinking of my long-established relationship with their CEO. Bradley insisted on handling it himself, Jason explained. He had a call with their finance department yesterday, but from what I heard, it didn't go well. He was defensive about our new payment system and suggested that Softcore's invoicing process was the real problem. That didn't exactly help the situation. I winced at this approach. Maxwell had always emphasized the importance of mutual respect in our business relationship. Blaming Softcore for our internal payment problems would only exacerbate the situation. By Thursday, the crisis had reached executive levels. Richard, our CEO, had become directly involved as client complaints about service performance mounted. According to Amanda, an emergency executive team meeting had been called to address the Softcore situation. Bradley presented it as a temporary technical glitch, she told me. But Carol, from customer success, challenged him, directly pointing out that the service degradation was directly linked to our payment failure. She had clients threatening to cancel contracts if the performance issues weren't resolved immediately. On Friday morning, almost exactly 1 month after my termination, the situation reached its breaking point. Softcore, following through on their warnings, implemented a complete payment freeze on tech growth services. Our production environments were still accessible but severely throttled, and all development and testing environments were suspended. The impact was immediate and severe. Client services slowed to a crawl, development work halted entirely, and the sales team couldn't demo products to prospective clients. The entire company was effectively crippled by the service restrictions. Amanda called me from outside the building, her voice a mix of stress and vindication. It's chaos here, she said. Richard has called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. The rumor is that Maxwell from Softcore will be joining to discuss the service suspension. Maxwell himself, I asked, surprised. The involvement of Softcore's CEO indicated just how serious the situation had become. Yes. And get this, Bradley spent the morning trying to recreate your payment verification process from memory. He had someone retrieve your process binder from storage, but no one can make sense of the custom validation steps without your guidance. The payment is ready to go, but Softcore's system won't accept it without the proper verification codes that were part of our agreement. I felt no satisfaction in this vindication. The company I had dedicated 12 years to was suffering. My former colleagues were under immense stress, and clients were experiencing service failures. None of this needed to happen. Later that afternoon, I received the most unexpected call of all. Richard's name appeared on my phone screen, causing my heart to race momentarily. Dolores, he said when I answered his voice, tired but determined. We need your help. I'm calling personally to ask if you would join our emergency board meeting this afternoon. We have a situation with Softcore that requires your expertise. The request was stunning given the circumstances of my departure. Richard, I was fired for trying to prevent exactly this situation. I reminded him, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. I know, and that's a situation we need to address separately, he acknowledged. But right now we have a critical business failure that you may be the only person who can help resolve. Maxwell Richardson from Softcore will be joining the call, and he specifically asked if you would be participating. The mention of Maxwell's request tipped the scales. Despite everything that had happened, I still cared about the company and the people who worked there. And professionally, I had always valued my relationship with Maxwell and Softcore. "I'll join the call," I agreed. "Send me the details." As I hung up, I realized that the situation had come full circle. The very expertise and relationships that Bradley had dismissed as outdated were now being urgently sought to save the company from a crisis of his creation. The board meeting promised to be one of the most dramatic confrontations of my professional life. The video conference link arrived in my email 30 minutes before the scheduled board meeting. I took extra care with my appearance, determined to present myself as the consummate professional despite the circumstances. This wasn't about personal vindication, I told myself, though I couldn't entirely suppress that sentiment. This was about resolving a crisis that was hurting the company and its clients. I clicked the link 5 minutes early and found myself in a virtual waiting room. When I was admitted to the meeting, I saw a grid of serious faces: Richard, our CEO, the entire board of directors, Bradley looking notably tense, and several executive team members. Maxwell from Softcore hadn't joined yet. "Dolores, thank you for agreeing to help us." Richard began, his tone formal but grateful. "We're facing a critical service disruption with Softcore that is affecting our entire client base." I nodded professionally. "I understand the situation. Amanda has kept me informed about the payment processing issues." Bradley's face tightened at this revelation, but he remained silent. Richard continued, "Maxwell Richardson will be joining us shortly to discuss the service suspension. Before he does, can you help us understand what's happening with the payment verification process? Bradley's team has been unable to complete the payment despite having funds ready to transfer." All eyes turned to me, including Bradley's reluctant gaze. I took a deep breath and explained as neutrally as possible. Softcore's payment system requires a specific verification protocol for large infrastructure payments. I began. This was established 3 years ago when we negotiated our enterprise agreement. Each payment requires validation codes that confirm the payment aligns with our service level agreement terms. I continued to explain the technical details of the verification process, being careful not to directly criticize Bradley's implementation decisions, while making it clear that this was a documented procedure that had been ignored. During the transition, just as I finished my explanation, Maxwell Richardson joined the call. In his early 60s, with silver hair and the relaxed confidence of a successful tech executive, Maxwell had been a supportive partner throughout our company's relationship. "Dolores," he said immediately upon seeing me, "I'm glad you're here. This situation has become unnecessarily complicated." "Thank you for joining us," Maxwell Richard interjected. "We're working to resolve the payment issue as quickly as possible and restore normal service levels." Maxwell's expression remained neutral. "I appreciate that, Richard. But I must say this situation was entirely preventable. We've had a well-established payment protocol with tech growth for years, managed expertly by Dolores and her team. I'm still unclear on how this relationship was allowed to deteriorate so rapidly." All eyes turned to Bradley, who shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "We've been implementing a modernized payment system to increase efficiency and standardization," he explained, his corporate jargon, a stark contrast to Maxwell's straightforward manner. "During the transition, some custom vendor protocols were temporarily disrupted. We've been working diligently to recreate the verification process for Softcore payments." Maxwell's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Holloway, this isn't about a temporary disruption. Your company has failed to make its contractually obligated infrastructure payment for over 2 weeks. Before implementing service restrictions, my finance team attempted to contact your department multiple times to resolve the issue. They were told that the legacy payment processes were being phased out, and that Softcore would need to adapt to your new standardized system." Bradley's face flushed. There may have been some miscommunication during the transition period. "It wasn't miscommunication," Maxwell countered. "It was dismissal of established business protocols without proper consultation. Our agreement with Tech Growth includes specific payment verification requirements that were developed collaboratively with Dolores' team. These aren't arbitrary demands. They're designed to integrate with our service provision systems." Richard intervened. "Maxwell, we take full responsibility for the payment failure. We're prepared to process the payment immediately, with all applicable late fees. What do we need to do to restore full service levels today? The payment needs to be processed through the established verification protocol, Maxwell replied. Based on our previous communication with your finance department, it seemed this process had been abandoned without any replacement mechanism. Bradley attempted to defend himself. We were in the process of developing an equivalent verification workflow in our new system. The implementation timeline. Maxwell interrupted something he rarely did in professional settings. Mr. Holloway, I have here the email exchange between your department and my finance team. He held up what appeared to be a printed document. Your response to their inquiry about the missing verification code states, and I quote, "The legacy verification process is no longer supported. Softcore will need to accept standard ACH transfers going forward." There was an uncomfortable silence as this information sank in. Bradley had essentially unilaterally attempted to change the terms of our agreement with our most critical vendor. I wasn't aware of that communication, Richard said, looking sharply at Bradley. It was part of our standardization initiative, Bradley replied, his confidence visibly wavering. Many vendors had custom payment processes that weren't sustainable as we scaled. Maxwell shook his head, then looked down at the document again. After a moment, he began to laugh. It wasn't mocking laughter, but rather the kind that emerges when someone finally understands the absurdity of a situation. "I'm sorry," Maxwell said, composing himself. "I just realized something. Richard, I've been trying to understand how this relationship deteriorated so quickly after years of smooth operation." He glanced at me, then back to Richard. "I'm reading between the lines here, but I have to ask. You fired your accounts payable supervisor, didn't you? The person who established and maintained this entire payment protocol." The directness of the question created a palpable tension in the meeting. Richard looked uncomfortable but answered honestly. "There was a departmental restructuring as part of our finance transformation," he acknowledged carefully. Maxwell's expression reflected disbelief. He looked directly at Richard and asked, "I'm sorry you fired your what?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, and one actually winced. Bradley stared straight ahead, his face a rigid mask. Richard cleared his throat. "In retrospect, that decision may have been premature, given the complexity of our vendor relationships." "Premature is an understatement," Maxwell replied, his tone now more direct. "Richard, we've had a productive partnership for many years, largely facilitated by Dolores and her team's professionalism. When she was abruptly removed from communications with us, followed by demands that we adapt to your new payment system with no transition period, it raised serious concerns about tech growth stability as a partner." One of the board members, Janet, spoke up for the first time. "Maxwell, what would it take to resolve this situation immediately and restore normal service levels?" "Two things," Maxwell responded promptly. "First, the current payment needs to be processed using the established verification protocol, which I believe Dolores can facilitate. Second, we need a commitment to collaborative discussion about any future changes to our payment processes rather than unilateral demands." All eyes turned to me again. I maintained my professional demeanor despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I can walk someone through the verification process if you'd like," I offered. "That would be appreciated," Richard said, relief evident in his voice. For the next 15 minutes, I guided Amanda, who had been called into the meeting, through the verification process, explaining each step and its purpose. As we worked, I could see Bradley's expression growing increasingly rigid. This public demonstration of the value of the very processes he had dismissed was clearly difficult for him to watch. With the verification process complete, and confirmation from Softcore's system that the payment had been accepted, Maxwell announced that service restoration would begin immediately. "Full service levels should be restored within 30 minutes, he assured Richard. "I would suggest we schedule a follow-up discussion about our ongoing relationship and communication protocols." "Absolutely," Richard agreed. "And Maxwell, thank you for your patience during this disruption. I assure you it won't happen again." After Maxwell left the call, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Richard spoke again. "Dolores, would you mind staying on the call while the board discusses next steps? We may have additional questions about the vendor payment processes. I agreed, though. I suspected what was coming had little to do with payment processes and more to do with personnel decisions. Janet, the board member who had spoken earlier, addressed Bradley directly. Mr. Holloway, could you please explain why the board wasn't informed about the risks associated with changing established payment protocols for critical vendors? Bradley attempted to defend his decisions, citing efficiency metrics and industry best practices, but his argument sounded hollow in light of the service crisis we had just witnessed. Another board member, Michael, was more direct. Did you consult with Dolores about the specific requirements for softcore payments before implementing the new system? We had general discussions about vendor requirements, Bradley replied evasively. That's not what I asked, Michael pressed. Did you specifically review the softcore payment protocols and ensure they were properly implemented in the new system before going live? Bradley's hesitation was answer enough. We were focused on implementing standardized processes across all vendors. The questioning continued for several uncomfortable minutes, with Bradley becoming increasingly defensive. Finally, Richard intervened. I think we have a clear picture of what happened, he said firmly. Bradley, we'll continue this discussion separately. For now, I'd like to speak with Dolores privately. Thank you everyone for your time. As the other participants left the call, I found myself alone with Richard facing the CEO who had allowed my termination just 1 month earlier. The conversation that followed would determine the next chapter of my professional life. Dolores, first and foremost, I owe you an apology. Richard began once we were alone on the call. His usual confident demeanor was replaced with genuine contrition. I failed to properly evaluate the changes Bradley was implementing and the concerns you were raising. That failure has cost the company significantly, both financially and in terms of client trust. His directness surprised me. In 12 years, I had rarely heard Richard admit a mistake so plainly. I appreciate that, Richard, I replied carefully. The situation was preventable. More than preventable, he acknowledged. It should never have reached the point of your termination. The board has asked me to offer you your position back with a substantial adjustment to both your title and compensation. I hadn't expected such an immediate offer. Part of me felt vindicated while another part remained cautious after the treatment I'd received. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Director of Vendor Relations and Financial Operations reporting directly to me until we sort out the CFO situation. The role would include oversight of all strategic vendor relationships and input on financial systems that impact those relationships. Compensation would be increased by 30% from your previous package, plus a signing bonus to account for the disruption of the past month. The offer was generous, acknowledging both my value to the company and the injustice of my termination. Yet I hesitated. Returning to tech growth would mean working in an environment where I had been publicly dismissed with colleagues who had witnessed my humiliation. I need some time to consider this, I said. The past month has been difficult, and I need to be certain that returning would be the right decision for both me and the company. Richard nodded. I understand completely. Take whatever time you need. And if you have any conditions or concerns that would affect your decision, please share them. We're prepared to be flexible. Over the next few days, I carefully considered the offer. I spoke with trusted friends and family, weighing the professional opportunity against the emotional impact of returning. I also drafted a list of conditions that would make my return viable. When I called Richard back, I was clear about my requirements. First, I need public acknowledgement of the value of the systems I built and the reason for my return. Not to embarrass anyone, but to restore my professional standing within the company. Absolutely, Richard agreed without hesitation. Second, I need authority to rebuild my team with the right people, including bringing back anyone who may have left during this transition. Approved, he said. We've already had 2 resignations from the finance department that we'd like to reverse if possible. Third, I want to lead the redesign of our vendor management systems, incorporating appropriate modern technologies while preserving the relationship aspects that made our previous system effective. That's exactly what we need, Richard confirmed. Finally, I want a seat on the executive leadership team. If vendor relationships are truly strategic to our business, they should be represented at the highest level of decision-making. There was a brief pause before Richard responded. The board and I have already discussed this possibility. We agree, and your new role will include executive leadership team membership. With my conditions accepted, I agreed to return to Tech Growth Solutions the following Monday. The weekend was a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness about returning to a place where I had been so publicly dismissed, excitement about the expanded role and opportunities, and a measure of satisfaction that my expertise had been vindicated. My return was announced in a company-wide email that directly acknowledged the critical vendor relationship challenges that had occurred and my role in resolving them. Richard didn't specifically mention Bradley, but the implication was clear when he referenced leadership changes in the finance department. As for Bradley, I learned he had been asked to resign immediately after the board meeting. His aggressive transformation approach without adequate understanding of existing systems had cost the company hundreds of thousands in lost productivity and damaged client relationships. The executive leadership team was interim, managing the finance department until a new CFO could be hired. My first day back was surreal. Colleagues welcomed me with a mixture of relief and slight awkwardness, unsure how to reference my abrupt departure and triumphant return. Amanda had organized a small welcome-back gathering in the break room, which helped break the tension. "We knew you'd be back," she told me quietly during the gathering. "After everything fell apart, it was just a question of when and how." The most satisfying meeting that first week was with Maxwell from Softcore. We had a video call to discuss restoring and strengthening our company's relationship. "I must say, Dolores, when I heard you had been removed from your position, I immediately had concerns," he admitted. "The processes you built weren't just administrative procedures. They represented a deep understanding of how our businesses interact." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "Part of my new role is ensuring that our strategic vendor relationships are properly valued and maintained, even as we modernize our systems." A much-needed perspective. Maxwell nodded approvingly. Over the following months, I led a careful redesign of our vendor management systems. Unlike Bradley's approach, we maintained existing processes while implementing targeted improvements. We consulted key vendors throughout, ensuring any changes would enhance rather than disrupt our relationships. My team grew to include specialists dedicated to our most strategic vendor partnerships. Amanda was promoted to manage day-to-day operations, while I focused on the strategic aspects of vendor relationships and their integration with our financial systems. The most profound changes, however, were in the company culture. My experience became a cautionary tale about the dangers of dismissing institutional knowledge in the name of modernization. Richard referenced it often when discussing change management, emphasizing the importance of understanding existing systems before transforming them. The search for a new CFO took nearly 6 months. I participated in the interview process, evaluating candidates not just on their technical financial expertise, but on their approach to understanding established systems before changing them. We eventually hired Diana, an experienced financial executive who valued institutional knowledge and collaborative change management. Working with Diana has been refreshing. She brings new ideas and modern approaches, but always takes the time to understand why things are done a certain way before suggesting changes. Our financial systems have evolved significantly under her leadership, becoming more efficient while preserving the relationship elements that make them effective. On a personal level, the experience taught me valuable lessons about resilience, standing up for my expertise, and the importance of documenting systems and processes. The process documentation that Bradley had dismissed as outdated ultimately saved the company from even more severe consequences. I now ensure that all our vendor management processes are thoroughly documented, not just in technical manuals, but with explanations of the reasoning behind each component. The most meaningful outcome has been the increased value placed on institutional knowledge throughout the company. Long-tenured employees are now regularly consulted during change initiatives, recognized for their understanding of why systems evolved as they did. New ideas are still welcomed and implemented, but with respect for existing processes and the relationships they support. Today, almost 18 months after that dramatic firing and return, Tech Growth Solutions is thriving. Our vendor relationships are stronger than ever. Our financial systems are more efficient while maintaining necessary flexibility, and our company culture values both innovation and experience. The lesson wasn't just about vendor management systems or financial processes. It was about respecting the knowledge built through years of experience Understanding that efficiency isn't just about standardization, but about effective relationships, and recognizing that true modernization builds upon existing strengths rather than dismissing them. Have you ever witnessed a leader dismiss experienced employees only to discover their value too late? What happened in your situation? Share your story in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more workplace experiences that teach us all valuable lessons. Remember, sometimes being underestimated is just the beginning of your greatest professional vindication. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you value your own knowledge and stand firm when you know you're right.